It might sound like an extreme request, but before I begin this video, I ask the audience to please be kind as the topic can be rather controversial, and please be patient if I cannot properly pronounce certain words in English since it is not my first language. If at any point you want to threaten or bully me, please simply close the video. Before we get into One Piece specifically, I think we need a quick commentary about fandom in general, because this quote-unquote phenomena isn't exclusive to One Piece. It is certainly predominant in other mainstream animes and other entertainment media. So even if you don't particularly care about One Piece, I invite you to try to watch the video and tell me if you feel this has happened to an online community you've been part of. Okay, so if you've been part of any fandom for the past decade, you've probably noticed a glaring shift in community and interaction, particularly the decrease in both. With the changes to how websites and apps operate, the endless scrolling and its subsequent mindless consumption, an urgency for more content was inevitable. But things were slower 10 to 20 years ago, and more open-ended, so to speak. Authors, artists, and readers used to be friends who relished sharing a common interest with one another. Being part of a fandom often equated to people engaging in their hobbies, something that brought joy. Genuine engagement was common given the plethora of forums and membered communities dedicated to countless TV shows, movies, animated series, etc. I emphasize genuine engagement because while on TikTok or Instagram people may have a huge following, likes, and comments, it seldom leads to a group of people beginning in-depth conversations about the topic. You don't really form bonds with anyone. Your engagement and the fan work ultimately end up feeding a vacuum. As of late, social media's impersonal formula led to the commodification of fan art and fan fiction, and furthered the commodification of art in general. The byproduct of such is the separation from artists and writers from their mutuals. It is no longer I make or write for my community, but rather I produce for an audience. You may like something, comment here and there, maybe respond to a few replies, but ultimately by the end of the day you move on and search for more stimuli. Artists became content creators. Writers can no longer write for fun, given that anything written outside of universally shared headcanons can be met with straight-up cyberbullying. Fandom etiquette is borderline non-existent, since the community became impatient consumers instead. And I don't mean to throw anyone under the bus, but I think that this is largely stemming from the Western population. I think that because Western countries emphasize consumerism, emphasize individualism, their population is now absolutely isolated in the sense that people are no longer interacting in real life the way that they used to. It's not that no one is, but that majority of at least the younger generation, is no longer participating in social settings that used to be common, used to be fundamental for their development. Couple that with making entertainment media, making art as something that is something that you consume. Hi everyone, post-production Vika here. I'll leave you with a quick excerpt of the essay The Puritanical Eye, Hypermedia, Sex on Film, and the Disavowal of Desire, written by Carly Gomez for Lo Specchio Oscuro, that illustrates what I'm driving at more concisely. We've been stripped and socialized out of any real political energy and agency. Our ability to consume is the only thing remaining that's ours in late capitalism, and as a result, it's become a stand-in for, or perhaps the sole defining quality of, every aspect of being alive today. Consuming is activism, it's love, it's thinking, it's sex, it's filling the blank. When the act of consuming is all you have left, and indeed the only thing society tells you is valuable and meaningful, the act must necessarily be a moral one, which is why people send themselves down manic spirals deciding what, who is problematic or not, because for us, the stakes are that high now. And because the internet is very westernized, even if you are from different countries and you have your connections with people from your own countries, such as I do, with people from Brazil. If I want to interact with other people online, I always have to have a more westernized approach. And because you are essentially conditioned as you're using the internet to also subscribe to westernized ideals and westernized line of thinking, this ends up affecting not only Western populations, but also populations all over the world. It creates animosity within um, spaces that have people from different countries because you don't subscribe to the same ideals. It's the history of civilization, right? Like, if you don't follow what I believe in, then you are incorrect. So, we're just seeing that in a new form with the internet and the shift that Western populations are going through in terms of isolation. On that same note, I don't mean to offend anyone when I say this, but many younger fans, teens and young adults, may feel as though the content creator owes them constant new content. And I don't fully blame them because they grew up on mindless consumption and the rapid release of new TV shows and movies in streaming platforms. And this impatience ultimately led to a shift in attitude. Virtually every generation has been responsible for being in adult spaces they're not welcome in. But younger fans nowadays tend to refuse accountability for their purposely ignorant actions. What do I mean when I say that? When I was 11 and I used Tumblr or Twitter or X, whatever the hell that website is right now, even Facebook. Is Facebook still Facebook? When I use like major social media platforms, I inevitably stumble upon things that I was not supposed to see, and I felt guilty because I knew that I was using a website catered towards adults. I understood that it wasn't my place to complain because I ignored the age recommendations. It's like going to a horror movie that is rated R with your 10-year-old cousin and then expect your 10-year-old cousin not to get terrified when there's extreme gore and extreme uh I don't know, jump scares, right? But this is where the sense of entitlement comes in, and please don't kill me for saying that. Younger fans completely ignore properly tagged trigger warnings or just the overall description of what's to be expected in the artwork, whether it be a fan art or a fan fiction. And instead of acknowledging the fact that they were giving the warnings and they ignored the warnings, they resort to blaming the author and artist for posting the work in the first place. Doing all of this while being present in a platform that wasn't catered to young users. I think that regardless of if the platforms nowadays claim to be catered towards uh, everyone, right? Whether it be preteens or adults, ignoring how years of the platforms being catered towards adults, the way that it functions is for adults. And no matter how many times you try to change things, it's not going to eliminate the adult audience and is not going to eliminate the way adults function. I think that, it goes a little bit with the responsibility of the parent to see what their children are doing online. I had like free reign online when I was a kid, but my parents always had conversations with me about stranger danger, as well as my older sisters. They were very adamant about who I was talking with online. Like, be careful what you're saying online. What is on the internet is on the internet forever. Like, all of those cliche like statements that parents will give you, or just overall like adult figures will give you, they're true, and you should listen to them. Teenagers may have like the capacity to understand accountability and responsibility and are not like to be equated with like a 10-year-old or like a 7-year-old, right? But they are still impressionable. If you're a teenager and you're watching this, you're still impressionable. If you stumble upon like artworks, fan fictions that like left you with visceral reactions, and it had the warnings, and it had the age recommendation. Maybe listen to that. Establish your limits. It's not the responsibility of the people that are doing their work of tagging things appropriately to delete their work, to stop enjoying the fandom in their own way. Younger fans, younger internet users in like a large scale need to learn the adequate that we learned. There's a space for adults, and there's the space for kids, and there's the space for adults, and there's the space for teenagers. Just respect that. But what does any of this has to do with shipping, and how does it apply to One Piece or other fandoms for that matter? Let's say our prayers. All right? May people refrain from sending me death threats over a fictional pairing that is unlikely to ever happen. Amen. I know this will enrage people, but let's begin by talking about Luffy and Law for a bit.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. All right. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something.
The backlash this pairing garnered over the past 5 years and its subsequent impact on the One Piece community on social platforms embodies the issues with fandom. Even if you don't particularly care about shipping, it's the motivation that affects how people approach fandom overall. It may sound dramatic, but I promise it'll make sense. And look, I'll be upfront and say it is particularly interesting to me, not only because I ship them and I have shipped them for a very long time. So I've seen the shift in how the audience perceives them from, let's say, 2015 to now. But also because as I observed this shift, I also saw like increasingly amount of people starting to scapegoat certain pairings and certain characters. And this is not limited to One Piece, the One Piece fandom, but the way that people, especially on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, not so much on Tumblr, the way that they'll scapegoat a pairing and then subsequently scapegoat any person that enjoys that pairing, or scapegoat a specific character and then subsequently scapegoat the person that enjoys the character. And I know some of you want to behead me for shipping them. Go ahead. This is a safe space.
Shoot me.
In 2015, there was opposition to Law and Luffy, but it largely stemmed from ship wars. In 2023, or 2024 by the time that I post this, if you like this pairing,
You are the incarnation of the devil and you must be jailed.
this is where the impersonal aspect of fandom shines through. It is easy to demand rather than create it yourself, regardless of the material not necessarily being done for you, but rather shared with you, with the intent of bringing happiness to the writer or the artist. What I'm talking about here is when a fan artist or a fanfic writer will share, let's say, a Law and Luffy fan art. Then you see people using the work with no permission from the artist to absolutely on the ship, either on TikTok or Instagram, and completely shit on every single person that ships that. So not only are they using a fan art that a person made and shared with a community that has the same interests as they do, they absolutely trash that person's art, absolutely trash that person's like source of like tiny happiness, right? And has like the audacity to not even credit them sometimes. Or like when fanfic writers will put their work out there and then people will be up in arms about this is, I don't know,
This is wrong. This is toxic. This shouldn't be out here for children to see. This is incorrect. You are sick in the head for posting this.
If you're reacting like that, maybe this isn't for you. If you're reacting like that, maybe this wasn't shared with you in mind, right? It goes back to the becoming an audience instead of a community. Not everything is for you. It is not necessary for you to absolutely on everything that you don't enjoy. People will have different experiences. In that impersonal aspect, it becomes easier to harass a content creator when they're viewed as just another online profile and not a person, or when they're viewed as a means of production and not a person. And what accompanies this dehumanization is the never ending anger fueled by moral purity directed towards problematic creators and users. For those that don't know, Puritanism is a religious reform movement from the late 16th and 17th centuries that regarded the reformation of the church under Elizabeth I as incomplete and sought to simplify and regulate forms of worship. Puritans believed that it was necessary to be in a covenant relationship with God in order to be redeemed from one's sinful condition, that God had chosen to reveal salvation through preaching, and that the Holy Spirit was the energizing instrument of salvation. You might be wondering how any of this is relevant to media today. And please pay attention to regulate forms of worship and to be redeemed of one's sinful condition as I read the next part. To maintain a devout life, Puritans opposed of anything that distracted people from God. Entertainment had to be related to godly activities like preaching, sermons, reading the Bible. To appease the Puritans, Elizabeth even banned theaters within London city boundary for like 60 years. The rise in a concept of Puritanism among teens and young adults, regardless if they're Christians or not, has ended the little sense of community and enjoyment fandom used to have. And I really need to emphasize concept, right? It's not that it's Puritanism itself, it's the methods that they used to regulate, to censor, to focus on this incessant need for you to be redeemed of things that are part of human nature. Because these methods are seen as, hold on, God. The irony of calling God right now. Anyway, and it is becoming particularly dangerous because these methods are being equivocally interpreted as social justice, and this is leading to an era of mass censorship. It already started with like shadow banning, the censorship of words. Like words are not the things that are gonna trigger anybody. Hi everyone, post-production Vika here. Just a little quick disclaimer by what I mean when I say that words won't trigger people. I don't believe that words trigger people. I believe that vivid description of the word does. For example, the taking of one's own life word isn't alarming, but a story with vivid description of the act may trigger someone struggling. It may sound unrealistic and extreme, but there are already bills being proposed in the United States that involve that very possibility. I'm looking at you, COSA. I'm looking at you, Restrict Act. I'm looking at you, reform of Section 702 for mass surveillance. And I found some stuff that I think it's interesting and worth keeping in mind when I talk about these bills, and I'll try to be as brief as I can and go back to fandom. Baron Soka, president of Tech Freedom, a nonpartisan technology policy institute, explains how COSA's requirement of platforms to act in the interest of minors opens the door to platforms restricting access to nearly all content. On that note, Evan Greer, president of Fight for the Future, an internet rights organization, highlights how enabling the government control over speech and content can be dangerous, given that conservatives with leanings toward far-right politics might exploit the law to censor content related to issues such as LGBTQ+ issues, racism, abortion issues, and even climate change. And they are pushing these agendas. They are doing all of this under the guise of these contents being harmful to children. Turning the focus back on fandom, in Vox's article, Puritanism took over online fandom and then came for the internet, Adria Romano explains. The common thread among this new generation of antis, a broad label for people who are opposed to sexual content in media, isn't that they're minors who are scared of sex. It's that none of them distinguish between fictional harm and real world harm. That is, regardless of their ages, they believe fiction not only can have a real world impact, but that it always has a real world impact. In other words, younger fans nowadays are having difficulty separating fiction from reality. Romano continues on highlighting how the merging of call out and cancel culture has provided a blueprint for antis to harass problematic creators and consumers under the guise of achieving moral justice. I don't agree with the usage of consumers, but let's say internet users. And this is where we see those methods of the concept of puritanism shine, right? The moral purity of one is the moral purity of the entire group, the entire fandom. And should one demonstrate degeneracy, they should not only be considered inferior, but should also be punished. Being a devout not of God, but of the moral superiority attributed with supporting a social cause. The intention may appear to be in good faith, but the merging of call out and cancel culture ultimately proves to be ineffective, given that fandom shipping and character biases have nothing to do with real world social justice. Marginalized groups continue to be further obscured and marginalized to this day within fandom. Black, trans, and non binary cosplayers constantly getting cyberbullied is a testament of that, as well as when black, trans, and non binary artists or writers will headcanon an existing character as trans or as black or as non binary or as all of the above, and people will be losing their shit in the comments. And you would imagine that if people really cared about social justice, really cared about the social causes that they claim to be fighting for, that they would help the people within their fandom going through that. But they are too busy going after problematic creators and users who like problematic pairings or problematic characters. What exactly is your priority here? Imagine all of that passion and all of that anger directed at the people that are truly hurting others within fandom. People patting themselves in the back over harassing and bullying problematic content creators and users is very different from annoying but largely insignificant competitions about which character belongs with whom. And I'm talking about ship wars. So you telling people to, you know, because of a problematic character, that's serious. That's a problem. You need therapy. People like fighting over ships, having like ship wars. When you grow up, you don't even care about that. And the people that like are engaging in that are usually young. So like just let them go at it. It's insignificant, It's insignificant. Not that I think it's right, but it's gonna happen. It always happens. But to upgrade from that to
Hey, I think maybe you should jump off a building because you like this character.
that's concerning. That's a red alert over there. Going back to Luffy and Law. Luffy and Law's discourse is reminiscent of Voltron's discourse about Shido and Keith. And I know that phrase just gave some of you war flashbacks. And I'll quote Romano again because the pairings are brimming with similarities. In the Voltron fandom in 2016, hatred for a single ship on the animated TV show reportedly led to the creation of an entirely new concept in fandom: the idea of being pro-ship. But pro stands for problematic and not pro as in favor of. The stated goal of this fight was to call out and oppose alleged pedophiles in fandom, but the actual goal was to wage war against one specific pairing by demonizing as a pedophile anyone who shipped it. The characters in question, Shido and Keith, were approximately 25 and 18 respectively in the show's first season. She continues on how harassment ultimately affects shipping overall, but also what was born from this constant harassment. Yet shipping is also often explicitly sexual, which makes it prone to distortion by people who want a moral excuse to oppose shipping. Just as with the original Voltron fandom ship war that presaged much of this discourse, people who are anti-ship often start out by seeking to attack specific ships based on their personal bias. Rather than acknowledging that bias, however, they instead frame fictional depictions of sex as harmful. This allows them to paint not only the ship they hate, but all ships, and shipping itself as harmful. What Romano points out about how people are more so concerned about character biases or shipping biases rather than the actual social cause that they claim to be fighting for is very blatant on the One Piece fandom. Because if it really was the issue of the age gap of Law and Luffy, there'd be more uproar about other supposedly questionable ships in the fandom. Like, there's little to no anti content directed at ships such as Marco and Ace with a 25-year gap, right? Yes, the pineapple is 45 years old post time skip. Apparently, some people didn't know that. But also, like, not that I care, right? There's like no outrage about Shanks and Makino with a 9-year gap, and I think that they met when she was like 18 years old. I don't see like the same amount of demonizing people who ship like Hancock and Luffy, who has like a 12-year gap, or Zoro and Robin with a 9-year gap. These last two, Hancock and Luffy, and Zoro and Robin, I feel like they stem more so of the interactions or lack thereof than the age gap itself. The age gap always serves as a like an afterthought, right? I feel like it also goes to another issue, which is when people say like Luffy, you can't ship him because it's auto ace. And they always say that when is Law and Luffy, when you see like Zoro and Luffy, you don't see the same level of, I don't know, visceral reaction, right? If it was about you caring about his auto ace identity and not like the bias that you have with the ship, then I think that like the same reaction that you're having to people that ship Law and Luffy should be in other ships that involve Luffy. But we don't see that. It's always Law and Luffy that garner this vitriol. And this is like starting to go towards even more famous ships. Like the Sanji and Zoro ship is now starting to get like major amounts of comments and like on TikTok at least that will say, shipping Sanji with any man is illogical. And then when you try to get to the bottom of what are you talking about? At their core, it's either like homophobia or biphobia. So it's like people that don't even care about LGBTQ plus issues, don't even care about like queer identities, but they will use that to satisfy their own character biases or their own shipping biases. They don't care about the moral perfection itself. And just so it's not like, oh, this is only in One Piece, because I do say that it happens in other fandoms. MCU's Wanda and Loki, the characters, not a ship. And Loki, particularly after Thor Ragnarok, when they completely retcon his character and kind of made the audience ignore everything that happened in the first Thor movie in the Avengers. The Yuta and Maki ship from Jujutsu Kaisen. I don't know much about My Hero Academia, but judging from the time that it came out and judging by um a lot of my mutuals on Tumblr who I occasionally see like posting, like venting about how frustrating it is to be in the fandom sometimes. The Bakugo and Deku ship is very controversial, apparently. I'm already gonna get crucified for literally everything that I'm saying in this video. So, God, okay. Let's just add more fuel to the fire. From Stranger Things, Billy Hargrove is also a scapegoat to the fandom, and subsequently the ship Herringgrove, which is Steve Harrington and Billy Hargrove. Hi everyone, post production Vika here again. Hey, I'm definitely not saying go bully every single person that ships any of the aforementioned pairs. I'm serious. Don't do that. I'm pointing out the hypocrisy present in harassment fueled by moral purity when the fandom resorts to scapegoat one pair while ignoring other pairings that possess the same traits they find abhorrent. And some of you might be thinking, who the hell cares about any of this, right? These are like inconsequential ships. Why should I care? Why is it worth making a video about? It was one inconsequential ship that altered the blueprint for fandom 50 years ago. And it was one inconsequential ship that now dictates how we're supposedly allowed to consume media today. Like, it may sound tiny, it may sound like contained to fandom, but the things that we saw in fandom, being born in fandom, is now being applied to the internet as a whole, to entertainment media as a whole. And it's kind of getting to the point that is ridiculous. Not that any of the aforementioned ships even begin to fall under this category, but dark fiction, and I mean truly dark, because I didn't even mention ships like Doflamingo and Law or Doflamingo and Rocinante, does not inherently romanticize and encourage anything. Artists and writers are allowed to explore the discomfort, the torture, the grotesque. The views expressed in art are not necessarily that of the author or the artist. Is Stephen King a murderer because he writes about murder? If shipping characters in the majority of romance stories were about writing what is considered to be a healthy relationship, there'd be no complex characters. There'd be no characters who feel human, since they're not allowed to commit any mistakes. There'd be no in depth analysis of anything. There'd be no like beloved enemies to lovers trope. And I'm not talking about boy is mean to girl. Girl says she can fix him. Like, I'm talking about characters that want to kill each other, okay? Like that level. That is still compelling, and it's not inherently encouraging you to fall in love with the guy that's gonna murder you.
No, my God. No.
It always goes back to like things that we analyze to this day, books that we analyze to this day, they would be banned. Okay? They're already trying to ban books because they are following this rhetoric that it's dangerous to kids. You see how it can become like tangible to society as a whole? And with all of that in mind, like, excuse me as I get a bit more personal. I'm gonna have to get personal a little bit, right? Needless to say, I am well aware of Luffy and Law's age gap. I am well aware that certain people that ship them infantilize Luffy, but I do find hypocritical of aunties to resort to this to vilify every single person that ships them, given that more often than not, they're guilty of the same. The way people treat Luffy, I feel like it's a bit how people treat Aang from Avatar The Last Airbender, where they see this character as something pure, right? Not to be touched by something so
Dirty.
when you think that everything is inherently sexual when it comes to shipping, which I don't think it is, right? Platonic relationships exist. Queer platonic relationships exist, okay? But I digress. It's this inability to see the complex aspect of the character. In terms of Luffy's character, because he is portrayed often as someone who values fun, as someone who values being carefree, someone who has an almost childish way of demanding food, right? Demanding his needs to be satiated in a way that a normal person doesn't, right? But just because Oda managed to capture Luffy's childlike innocence directed at adventures and directed at what the voyage of a pirate means, it doesn't mean that Luffy isn't capable of having his serious moments. It doesn't mean that Luffy is completely incapable of comprehending complex political issues, for example. Dude's literally going around liberating countries. And while there is on the surface the joke of, oh, he only did it because this person gave him food or this person helped him with something so minimal, that's Luffy's way of making light of a very, very, very bad situation. He knows that he's liberating countries. He knows that he's instilling freedom in people's hearts when everything is hopeless. Otherwise, in Annie's lobby, he wouldn't have said he understands Robin's enemy very well. In Dressrosa, he wouldn't have cared about saving the country when he said, what about these people? I can't just leave them behind. So the Luffy that has this childlike excitement and childlike innocent view of what it means to have an adventure and what it means to be a pirate. The Luffy that is selfish to the point that is comical. He can exist with the Luffy that is serious enough to liberate countries, to fight against tyrannical governments, to fight against people who enslave others. For him to have childlike traits does not immediately erase all of the aspects of what makes him a multifaceted character. And then Aang with the way that he's passive about things, the way that he tries as much as he can not to resort to violence. And this is often like read by a Western population as femininity, right? So because he has these aspects of femininity, then he's supposed to be pure and demure. And if you do anything that, I don't know, taints this image that I have of this character, then you're the problem. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I could go on a tangent about my interpretation of how Luffy matured after the time skip in response to the common but very flawed belief that he is as dumb as a child, so therefore he is a child. We could sit here all day and discuss the symbolism that the characters possess: sun and moon, dawn and dusk, how it fits with the theme of true freedom in a One Piece world. We could talk about my favorite, which is angsty as hell, which is forced devotion. I am nothing more than a tattered line in the tapestry of your fate, and I am bound to you until you accomplish what it is that you need to accomplish. And until then, I have to be obfuscated by your brilliance. And that is something that pains me, but something that I love at the same time. I could continue to go on a tangent of why I think that they are compelling. I could sit here and explain myself and beg forgiveness for liking them, but I won't. I won't go on a tangent. I won't explain myself because at the end of the day, these are fictional characters. What I read about them, the fan arts that I love of them, will never be the source material. And I don't need it to be. No one in the real world is getting hurt by me reading stories about two characters being pirates in a world that does not exist. Like a real person is not getting hurt by it. A real person is not, I don't know, like the narrative that you built being groomed. They're not real. What you're doing when you're shipping characters is you're grabbing a Barbie doll and you put it with a Barbie doll. Or you put the Barbie doll with the Ken doll. Or you put the Ken doll with the Max Steel. People that ship in general are simply exploring the source material through their own interpretations. Fandom doesn't have to validate what is canon, at least not all of the time. The canon material acts as a guideline in fandom, not a rule book. If every fanfiction and fan art was supposed to follow canon material to a T, there'd be no fanfiction and fan art. A common trend nowadays when having discussions online or having arguments online is people hitting you with
It's not that deep.
interpretations, explorations. They are that deep. That is literally what literature and art is about. Media literacy, literacy in general, is more than reading or watching something and then writing a summary about it. It's about being able to build your own interpretation as well as comprehending the author's interpretation. It's about being able to understand how the material utilizes its literary devices, its elements and techniques. An example of interpreting media, right? When Oda wrote the scene of Luffy punching the celestial dragon in the face, was it just Luffy punching a jerk, or was he standing up for something bigger in that moment? Was it Luffy protecting his friend who happens to belong to a largely marginalized race after he was shot by the embodiment of imperialism and colonialism inside a slave trading facility? After watching another friend being bought alongside countless others by the people that hold the power in the One Piece world due to their money and influence. Sorry I got carried away, but the point still stands, right? You can have other interpretations of that scene, but because it is capable of having so many interpretations or having one particular strong interpretation, it is well loved because it is beyond a punch to the face. Media literacy also entails being able to analyze characters through the lens of theme and narrative theory, as opposed to always, is it defendable? Is it relatable? If we were to only analyze characters based solely on whether they are defendable or relatable, Doflamingo wouldn't be a well loved villain in the One Piece world. The Joker wouldn't be a well loved villain in the DC universe. It's also about being able to discern whether the author's depiction of something complicated is simply a depiction that holds, substantial symbolism, context, subtext, what have you, or is it glorification? The public nowadays is very quick to assign every single depiction as glorification or using the word romanticizing without fully knowing what that means, right? But just because something on a screen or page makes you feel uncomfortable or makes you have a visceral reaction, makes you feel scared, it doesn't automatically mean that the author is endorsing that as something pleasurable or that the author is urging you to feel pleasure or reassurance when you're watching certain scenes. Art is allowed to be provocative, and as I said earlier, fiction will have its moments of discomfort, right? We're all guilty of escapism to a certain extent, but please be mindful as to whether it is blurring the lines of the actual plot or narrative. Not every single artwork that you watch is going to provide you reassurance that you are seeking. In terms of shipping, going back to shipping, I don't need people online patronizing and harassing me about what I consume because I'm not the one struggling with separating fiction from reality. I don't need people online patronizing and harassing me about a character's supposed sexual orientation, and I'm talking about Luffy here, because I am asexual, and quite frankly, most of you have no idea what asexuality even entails. You have no idea of the spectrum that the orientation possesses, and yet you love to weaponize the sexual orientation to make people feel bad about themselves, about Fictional characters. I really urge people to read more about asexuality and aromanticism. And I urge people to be more open about the fact that because Luffy is such a great character due to his asexual traits, as well as Zoro, it's the reason why asexuals and aromantics or both get to explore what their sexual orientation means to them through the characters. It doesn't have to be an ultimatum. Moral purity is unattainable. The ill intended utilization of social justice as moral motivation to harass people online is creating more animosity within fandom, destroying a hobby that is supposed to be fun while simultaneously instigating apathy towards real issues happening in real life. This isn't to say that discussions about real issues cannot occur in fandom or the internet, but when it comes to fiction, fiction can and will always open the door to conversations about reality, but must never be confused with reality. Please remember that fandom, and any form of entertainment for that matter, entails each to their own. You are bound to cross ways with things that aren't catered to you. But if you don't like it, you can always scroll away or close the tab. If you are on Tumblr, you can literally filter tags you don't want to see. If you're on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter, please be mindful of the tags that you are interacting with and interact with it appropriately. Keep in mind that you can curate your own experience and that the existence of someone else's is not inherently bad just because it doesn't align with your own. There's something that we do on Tumblr that I think it should be applied to TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, where when people are talking about characters that they hate or ships that they hate, they usually tag it as anti ship or anti character, so that it doesn't cross ways with the people who are sharing things that they enjoy about the characters. So each group gets to have their space without crossing paths and people getting hurt over something trivial. Please be kinder to artists and writers. They are putting their work out there for free. It is a form of entertainment for us, but a hobby for them. Their main goal isn't to please an audience, but to have fun. Often, writers want to start a community. If you comment on their fan fiction about your own ideas, your own perception, and interpretations of the work, you can always start a conversation with them, right? It doesn't have to be a one way street, it can be something that provides happiness and community for everyone. So, there you have it, folks. It's done. I could have spent like another 12 hours talking about this because the issue is very nuanced, right? It's not just one little thing that is causing, I don't know, this major disruption in fandom and then internet in general. I hope you enjoyed the video. It is my first YouTube video, so I am a bit nervous. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce certain words or if I just pronounce in a way that you can't really understand it. I hope I articulated my thoughts coherently, and if I didn't properly explain anything, or if you would like some links to threads that I read that are explaining this way better than I am, of course, please don't hesitate to ask me in the comments, and I'll let you guys know which ones are my favorites, which ones that I used as reference. Depending on how this video is received, hopefully with no pitchforks, I plan on making a video about two subjects that I love, Celtic mythology and One Piece. I also want to get into perhaps some gaming. I really love video games. I'm not a gamer, but maybe just post some videos of me suffering through horror games, since it's my favorite. I also want to do like exploration. I never gave My Hero Academia a chance, and I'm getting kind of curious, so maybe like document my journey through watching the anime for the first time. Perhaps by the end of the videos, make a tiny analysis of what I like in terms of the message or in terms of the direction that they take. Please let me know of your experience with fandom in the comments. How long have you been part of one? Did you have a close knit community because of it? Do you still have the close knit community because of it? And if you don't really care about any of this stuff, what do you think of it? Do you think it's just drama? Do you think it has like a it truly has an effect on internet and how we interact? Let me know your thoughts. E aí, fellow humans! If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and please don't forget to check me out on other social media. Ciao! Before I truly end this video, I feel like if I were to end it without touching on current events, it would be done in a bad faith, and it would honestly leave a bad taste in my mouth, as this been something that consumed what I've been doing. I don't want to just post something and pretend that nothing is happening. Like, I engage in escapism as much as the next guy, okay? But these things are happening around the world, and we have to acknowledge it. And if I'm gonna garner some hate because of it, so be it. I want an audience that really cares about these things. And by the time that I post in this video, I'm pretty sure like everyone already knows what's going on in Palestine. So if you have some time, please go to the document that I'm leaving in the description of this video, and I'm providing with links that will direct you to petitions, donations, uh, trustworthy donations, right? With explaining what's going on in Palestine. That is not a conflict, right? It's a gen. I don't know how censorship works in YouTube. Not only Palestine, I'll be providing links to Congo, links to Sudan, links to Armenia. But I do admit that Palestine has more resources, as I still have to do a proper research on Congo, Sudan, Armenia, so on and so forth. Um, but it's just unfortunate that it's just happening to so many people. We can't be silent when these things are happening. If we claim to care really about freedom of the oppressed, if we care really about moving on as a society where people will truly, truly be free, then we can't be silent.